and expanding partnership in a series of very important items, particularly with regard to security, culture, and humanitarian assistance. The outreach meetings have proven their worth. And we have concentrated, obviously, on the Global South and the Global East. We have invited members from the CIS, many delegations, and also heads of leading international organizations. We have focused in all these meetings on international problems. We have also looked at the outlook for more cooperation and coordination between the South and the East. I think the main thing which we should note is that the atmosphere has been constructive and businesslike as usual. And we have been led to discuss the widest possible spectrum of issues, and this has been reflected in the communiqué or the Declaration of Kazan. This is a very topical document full of positive ideas for the future. We are striving for a more multipolar world of sovereign states according to the UN Charter, and this reflects the common determination of all our members to underline traditional world values. We paid great attention to the financial aspects as well, and we discussed ideas of new platforms which circumvent the traditional payment methods, and we believe that this will lead to a further stimulus to investment policy, and particularly in the Global South. And this will be helped by the new development bank, the new BRICS Development Bank. Russia has proposed this creation, and given the fact that Brazil will be taking over the chairmanship of BRICS next year, and therefore we have a Brazilian chairman in Dilma Rousseff. I will not conceal from you the problems around Russia. We discussed that too. I think there is a good outlook for further development and coordination in industry. And of course, we also discussed and created new coordination methods for culture and sport activities between our countries. And this BRICS forum is open to everybody who actually wants to join. And we have no intention of foisting or imposing our views on anyone. We have an approach to resolving world problems on a constructive basis and on the basis of a partnership principle. There were a lot of bilateral and multilateral meetings in various formats. Ladies and gentlemen, the summit is now over. I should just like to thank you once again, all the participants, for coming and for making their contribution to our common work. And I think that your contribution has been weighty. I think it's very important to underline the fact that Russia has been very important in this respect. And of course, we will be lending our political weight to the organization, and we'll be partners of all the members of the organization. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the authorities of Tatarstan, and particularly the mayor of Kazan, for his assistance in organizing the conference, and apologize to him for the inconvenience we have caused with motorcades, corteges, and so on and so forth. But I think that this was not in vain, and I'd like to thank you all once again for your participation and contribution. I have a number of bilateral meetings, so I'm afraid I won't be able to take questions, and I can't make my colleagues wait. But there is time for a couple of questions. Yes. Could you talk about the new payment system which has been discussed? Well, as far as SWIFT is concerned, we haven't actually set up and have no intention of setting up an alternative to it, but nevertheless this question is very important. One of the main problems is payment between us, and so we are taking the approach that we should be trading in local currencies. We're already using the Russian payment system in local currency, and it is being used by some members of BRICS. But as for some kind of separate joint system, we haven't actually come up with that yet. But we simply have to take the relevant decisions at the right time to do it. Introduce yourself, please. This is the first summit which takes in so many members, such a broad-based membership. Could you tell us how work is going on providing for membership conditions? Many countries are working on that. Many countries are taking part in the various formats. But in terms of a first round of expansion, we are concerting a list of members. Yesterday, members put forward their proposals, and we will be deliberating that. And then we will put our proposals to the next meeting, And when we get a reply, we will take a decision on the basis of that. But we can't do anything until we get some kind of proper answer from our members. Next one, further back there, please. The theme of the conflict in Ukraine has been brought up in a number of comments to your speeches. Could you tell us what the members think of that and what kind of support are we getting? Everybody hopes that the conflict will end as quickly as possible and peacefully as well. You know that Brazil and China have put forward a proposal during the General Assembly of the UN in New York, and the member states of BRICS have supported that, and we are very grateful to the members who have tried to put forward ideas to resolve the conflict. Our guest there from the USA. All right, let me begin with your first question. Because that's very important and it reflects something. I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that the actions of Russia have not escalated things in the Ukraine. But the US have certainly done that, and they've even publicly declared how much money they're pouring into it. So is that not a way forward to escalation? They constantly say that they want to solve the Ukrainian conflict by peaceful means. But they've even publicly said that they have deceived us on that score. And is that not escalation? Is that not deceit? And then Western countries have started to actively arm Ukraine. And what has that led to? It means the direct participation of NATO countries in the war. Because we know how drones have been launched over the Black Sea, for example. We know that they're present. NATO countries are present in that. And the same thing goes for instructors. Not mercenaries, but instructors. And supplying them with modern weaponry. The Ukrainian armed forces can't do that without space reconnaissance and without the direct participation of NATO countries. As far as North Korean participation is concerned, as you know, we have an agreement with them on military cooperation. And we've never doubted the North Korean attitude towards Russia. But this is our business. We have to have further negotiations with North Korea. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, the Russian army is acting in a very confident way and is forging ahead in all sectors. It's actively working in the Kursk district. And I think that there's some 2,000 men who were surrounded and blockaded. We are dealing with evacuation. And we have tried to eliminate the Ukrainian forces in the area. We've been accused over the last year of intervening in the American elections in favor of Trump, but this is complete rubbish. Nothing of the sort has ever happened. It didn't happen in the past, and it's not happening now. How, after the elections, Russo-American relations will evolve, well, we have yet to see. We will adopt the same measures they do towards us. It will be the choice of the future administration. Zarubin, Mr. Zarubin over there, please. Just like to continue that point about conversations with Trump. It appears that he threatened you in one of his conversations. Is that typical of the kind of relations which you have at the moment with world leaders? Are you isolated more and more now? Well, on the question of threatening, anybody can threaten anyone. If we're threatened, it only encourages us. But there weren't any such threats in my conversations with Mr. Trump. I would advise you not to take too seriously the utterances which you receive in the pre-electoral campaign in the States. They are certainly trying to isolate us in order to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. Oh, isolation. Yes. You know, we get a number of different signals from the White House. We don't conceal that. But the idea that I am refusing contact or conversation, all I would say to that, again, is that's complete rubbish. I'm not refusing anybody. On the contrary, we're trying to renew our relations. We're not trying to impose anything. We're getting on with our lives. I think that the economy shows that we're doing very well. We are witnessing a good growth rate. But we obviously have a lot of problems. The Americans as well, they have a deficit in a number of very important areas, foreign trade, for example, and an enormous debt. We also have problems, of course, but it's better not to row about that or come into conflict about it. We are trying to address those problems in the framework, in fact, of BRICS. We have to wrap up now. A question from our African friends over there. Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know whether I can speak French or I can translate it into English. She says, well, I'm a journalist from the Pan-African Union. President, my team and I are involved in making a documentary about the Donbass. We know that African states are victims of armed uprising as well. We've seen Russian involvement in the Central African Republic, and the situation has not been stabilized at all. So we are active in the Donbass, looking at that situation. Is it the intention of Russia to enlarge its military cooperation within BRICS? Yes, I agree with you. I think that is, in fact, the sense of our cooperation with our BRICS partners. But there is no real platform in BRICS about that particular subject. I've just had conversations in these concluding stages with my colleagues from Africa. And we have been talking with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Republics, Emirates, of course, about the rate of economic growth. They are developing very, very fast, particularly Southeast Asia and Africa. But we are actually asking questions of ourselves as to whether we shouldn't have a completely new investment platform for BRICS, a system which could help investments in very fast emerging markets in your region, for example. Why do we do this? There are several reasons for this. First of all, your countries have a very high, fast rate of birth rate in Africa. There are every year 10 million people more. And in India, the same kind of thing. But Africa is prominent in this respect. And then you've got a very high rate of urbanization in line with this. And the standard of living will also rise very quickly in line with these phenomena. And there are a number of other factors as well to take into consideration. Growth and capital investment. So all that points to the fact that we must pay much more attention to your area of the world. And we have to try and create mechanisms for reliable investment in your African countries. You have to get investment back from your new productive units. We need tools, we need financial instruments which will help us tap the potential of that market. We are perfectly capable of that, and we will be focusing on it. I promise you. Very important question there. One last question for today. BBC. I've read the outcome of the summit, particularly with regard to global security and a new world order. But how does that actually link up with your actions in the Ukraine? Justice, stability, and so on. And the security of Russia as well. Because there weren't any drone attacks on Russian territory before, no incursions of foreign forces in Russia. So how did this all link up with Britain's role in all this? Well, let me talk first of all about the security of Russia, because that's my responsibility. No, it's true, it didn't happen before. But because of the worsening situation, our insistent proposals to improve relations with the west of Europe come to nothing. And this would, if we hadn't acted, it would have forced us to stand down and betray our people. And it would have led to a very big loss of sovereignty for our country. We would cease to exist. Russia will cease to exist if it loses its sovereignty. That is the most important point. Russia needs sovereignty and independence in its finances, in its military, and so on. And we need to think about our development in the future. And we have to work with partners like the ones we have in BRICS, who respect the independence of Russia, respect our traditions and values. Now, on the question of justice in development, was that the sense of your question? Yes. Well, look, I have a number of considerations, notions about that. I'll share them with you. What is fairness in terms of, look at the recent events. The whole question of COVID infections. What happened? I'd like to draw your attention and that of all the other media representatives here. The US invested something like $6 trillion of dollars, and the EU 3. In medical research, vaccines, and all of that, of course, led to a huge wave of inflation. What did the leading economies of the world do? They abused their dominant financial situation, and they took all the essential merchandise off the markets for themselves. Is that just? Is that fair? We think it's not. And on the question of security in general, I understand what you're talking about. But for years, the West has ignored the problems in the east of Ukraine. And we were promised that there wouldn't be any NATO expansion for years. Is it really fair to throw us under the bus like that? And build military bases on our frontiers? Is it just and fair to have coup d'etat? And to incite coup d'etats in countries like Ukraine on our borders? Is that justice? Is it just to subvert the OSCE, for example, when all countries are subscribed to the subversion of the indivisibility of security? Do you think the expansion of NATO is fair? We will achieve our aims, have no fear. It's full rubbish. It's complete rubbish. I mean, what the British intelligence says. What is happening in the streets of Europe is the result of domestic policy. We know very well the recession elements in European countries and the low rate of growth. What have we got to do with that? This is the policy of domestic policy of European countries. It's because you refused Russian energy. What have we got to do with it? We are ready to supply. It's just a question of pressing a button and everything would happen. And I won't name names, but one of our colleagues simply made the whole part of the German economy dependent on the US. What about Stream 4, for example? What have we got to do with the decline in the rise in cost of living in Europe? What I'm talking about are based on the statistics of European countries themselves. It's an attempt simply to pass the buck. Incorrect decisions in the economic field. That's what it was. Many people in Europe and in other countries as well are trying to abuse the ecological environmental agenda and are running ahead and are ignorant or haven't analyzed fully atomic energy, for example, and everything connected with the fossil fuel industry. Can certain countries in Africa actually do away with the fossil fuels? But you need money to safeguard the environment. And so what they're doing is to put the screws on, and what they do are humiliating these countries and then overburdening them with loans. It's just another form of neocolonialism. So what we have to look at are the results, the economic and financial results of Western European countries. And the escalation of the problems in Europe have nothing to do with the conflicts in the East. You always have to look at who is behind this exacerbation of the situation. We have a couple of minutes left. Let's give the last word to the Russian media. Let's do it sector by sector, says Putin. The lady there. How do you react to the idea which had been put forward that Moscow could actually be on the side of attacking Israel? I must say, first of all, that we are very concerned with what's happening in the Middle East. And Russia is very interested in this conflict being peacefully settled. And as far as assistance to Iran is concerned, we are in close contact with Iran, certainly. And we are trying to find some compromise in order to bring the parties to the negotiating table. We are very much working against this conflict expanding and spilling over. I am from Kazakhstan, Mr. President. I'm sorry, Kyrgyzstan. I represent a civil society association in Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is very much for a multipolar world. And BRICS is focusing on a lot of very polemical problems in the East. And there's the role of Iran. So my question is this. Russian involvement with Iran, particularly in the Persian Gulf, the Americans say that President Putin is refusing to talk to them. Is that true? Are you rejecting invitations to negotiate? Thank you very much. Your colleague has just been asking about our relations with Iran. First of all, let me just be clear about the Middle East. I don't think there's a human being on earth who wouldn't weep at looking at the news. We are determined to try and get out of this situation. And we have to look at the reasons for these conflicts. One of them is obviously the lack of any kind of full-fledged independence for the Palestinians. We are absolutely determined that this conflict should not spill over. So we have to try and analyze this situation with a very cool head. And try, as much as we possibly can, to lower the tension, reduce tension in the Middle East. I'm afraid of actually saying too much here because any word could be misinterpreted. But as far as negotiations are concerned with Western leaders, I've already spoken about that. People are trying to work out some kind of platform for negotiations with Ukraine. I'd just like to tell you that in 2022 we had a similar situation where the Ukrainians pulled out. I remember Obama phoning from New York saying we have a new proposal for negotiations. And we said, fine, great. And then the next day we were told that no such negotiations would take place. We have to know, if we're going into negotiations, whether our clients actually want to or not. I think that last year we lost something like 16,000 men, and they were essentially the ambulance service. I think that in the counteroffensive, the Ukrainians lost 17,000. Although they lost fewer tanks, I think that was just because they used fewer. But better than quoting these kind of figures. We ought to look at what's happening on the ground. But, the Kiev regime doesn't want to start negotiations. I think mainly because when they do away with the military rule, they would have to have elections for the president, and nobody wants that. Good evening. What are you prepared to do to stop the war in Ukraine? And how far are they willing to go? Well, we're prepared to look at any kind of option, agreements, based on the real circumstances on the ground. Thank you very much, President. Saudi Arabia. I would like to speak in Arabic if possible. Well, first, the work on membership of BRICS you're absolutely right when you say that we need to structure the organization. We are thinking about that, and we certainly will be dealing with that problem. I think that we're interested in members who are sincerely interested in promoting the organization. And the other thing is that we are very concerned not to over-bureaucratize the organization. Set up some kind of staff. Nobody knows where that can end. But of course, you're absolutely right when you say that membership has to be structured. But I've already spoken to this. We're talking about projects with Saudi Arabia which are fairly modest at the moment, so $3 billion, for example. It's very important for members like Russia, China, and South Africa to have a proper payment exchange mechanism. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, Saudi Arabia is our friend, and we have very good relations with them. And today they took part in some of our work, and we hope very much that that will continue in the future. A question in Portuguese. I'm a journalist from O Globo, which is the main newspaper in Brazil. Question about President Maduro taking part in BRICS and Brazil being against that. And my second question has to do with your attitude to the Brazil-China peace plan for Ukraine. Or is this question totally unnegotiable for you? You know, I think this question is incredibly complex. But I don't think there's any sense in beginning negotiations and then having to reject the result. Turkey also put forward proposals with regard to the Black Sea, with regard to quotas and so on. And then there was the question of safe nuclear power plants. And then we were told that there wouldn't be any negotiations at all. We agree to negotiate, and then the negotiations are broken off. So what do you expect us to do? It is if you ask me, what we are talking about in Venezuela is external interference by the US. And we are talking about the same kind of thing happening in Ukraine. So it's very difficult to assess this whole situation properly. As far as Brazil is concerned, we know that our positions do not converge on this issue. We've spoken about that publicly. I have very good, friendly relations, I would say, with the president of Brazil. But he is interested in his own independence and sovereignty, and I know his views. And we know about his opponent, who said that God was on his side. It's just ridiculous. The same thing happened with certain people in the US administration. People can't just come out and say they are president by the will of God. We believe that Maduro won in the elections, in the presidential elections. But we know that Brazil and Venezuela are in bilateral negotiations. Maduro is a very honest, open man, and we hope very much that they will be able to come to some kind of compromise on an objective level. I hope the situation will be ironed out. I've had conversations with Maduro on the telephone. I think that in terms of membership of BRICS, new members can only be admitted on the basis of consensus. We need the consensus of all the members of the organization. And doing without that, it would be impossible. Do forgive me, but I have colleagues waiting for me for bilateral talks. So I do apologize, but I have to leave now.